is fundamentally because a moral necessity is placed on society that we reserve our harshest punishment for true evil, that the negative team opposes the abolition of the death penalty. I'll be presenting to you 3 main voting issues today. These voting issues will comprise the core of the negative argumentation against the affirmative claim and show you why, very simply, the only realistic and only just solution is to maintain the death penalty. I want to first begin by stating the moral necessity, and that'll be my first voting issue, moral necessity. I'll have 2 subpoints under this. A, must punish evil. Must punish evil. I didn't hear the affirmative team get up and say that Steve Smith didn't deserve the death penalty. I didn't hear them get up and say that those individual people that my partner read evidence on didn't deserve the death penalty, because it is impossible for us to say that crimes that reprehensible are deserving of anything less than the most permanent, irreversible, and severe punishment we can give them. It is impossible for us to conscionably argue that that is not true evil, and true evil must be punished by any just society. We must punish this evil. I don't think that they'll argue that evil must be punished, but what they say is we need to put a cap on what that punishment could be, and it is strongly the position of the negative team that for the worst of the worst, there shouldn't be a cap on that punishment. We should impose our most impossibly humane punishment. In essence, if it is in any way morally justifiable, and the death penalty certainly is. It is permanent, it incapacitates, and it deters. If it is just, then that is the sentence we must impose. My second point is going to be saves lives. Saves lives. Now, I want to point out that this is under the issue of deterrence, and I'll be addressing this additionally under my 3rd issue, but let's drop the core of it right here. First of all, they dropped the individual study justifications we asked of them. If they're going to say that one study is correct and all these others are wrong, they need to read the individual justifications rather than just saying, our one study is correct and all of your others are wrong, that's the end of it. And they got up and they said, well, it's the definition of credibility. My response is 18 academic studies under the card that my partner read to begin found the same thing. So those are also the definition of credibility, and saying that one person or one entity, one institution, saying that tens of other academic institutions somehow got it wrong, they're the only one that got it right, is frankly stretching the imagination just a little bit. The idea that one person is always going to be correct when they are known as the authority on something, just because they're the authority on something, is a fallacy. When you're going the wrong way, all the other cars look like they are. The fact is, this is, in and of itself, not a reason to prefer the affirmative claim. Rather, the entire academic literature vastly supports us. They have one study saying that everyone else is wrong. That said, this saves lives under deterrence theory. My partner has given you several pieces of evidence to support this. They've gotten up and they've said, yeah, but our one guy says that they're wrong. Okay. Now let's move to my second voting issue today, which is realistic solution. Realistic solution. The fact is, the affirmative is operating in a vacuum. In a in a utopian world in which you don't have to compare the alternative to what you're doing. They've dropped the fact that this has the lowest margin of error among the punishments according to their own evidence. Flow this through as negative, and that's my first subpoint. They've dropped the fact, and my second subpoint, that it is selectively applied. Selectively applied. It's not as if this is indiscriminate. They dropped this fact entirely. Their own evidence says it, they concede it. They've dropped the fact that a case-by-case basis is necessary to evaluate culpability, that every case is unique and individual and should be judged on the merits of its case rather than by a blanket policy. They've dropped the fact that there is no perfect world. They didn't at all address my argument that they were operating in a utopia. They entirely ignored it. The fact is, unless we're operating in a utopia, you have to compare what you're doing to what the results will be, what the alternatives will be. They've never been able to effectively do that. My last voting issue will be definition of justice. The death penalty is the definition of justice. How do I mean? My first subpoint under here is going to be deterrent. Deterrent. It absolutely fulfills the deterrent role of punishment that punishment must play in a just society. The fact is, in order for punishment to be accurate and to be effective in a just society, it must fulfill deterrence, and the vast majority of the literature agrees with the negative team. Next, it must be incapacitative. That's my second subpoint. It's it's incapacitative. The death penalty is the ultimate incapacitation, preventing those who have been sentenced to it from committing the crimes that my partner described in the maximum security prison. Those people receive the life imprisonment alternative the affirmative advocates, and they continue doing harm. That is unjust, and the death penalty prevents that. Thank you.
How much negative protest do you have? Great. You go ahead and start that, please.
Today, we came to discuss whether or not reform is needed. And when we look at each of our 4 justifications, we show that it is. We cannot honestly look at the facts and pretend that capital punishment is a better policy than the alternatives. That's exactly what I'll be demonstrating in today's last speech, as I'll be going through all 4 of our justifications, showing you why they still stand, and my subpoints responding to the last negative speech. My first point is that of innocent executed. Innocent executed. Now, my first subpoint under this is that of 4.1% protected. 4.1% protected. Now, under the current system, because of human fallibility, innocent people will always be put at risk. Now, this is an unacceptable margin of error in our system. The fact that innocent people will always be put at risk and that their sentences cannot be revoked will always be putting innocent people at risk. But what the Affirmative Team's plan does is it makes sure that these 4.1% of innocent on death row are protected. And we have alternatives such as prison, which is much better. Whenever you're sentenced to life in prison, and if you're found innocent afterwards, that penalty can be reversed. So because of that, it makes it smarter policy because it doesn't have as much of a massive margin of error like the capital punishment does. Now my second justification is that of mentally ill executed. Mentally ill executed. Now this is very simple. Mentally ill people who commit a crime will still be punished under a plan. We are not living in a utopia, and it will still be on a case-by-case basis under the affirmative plan. The judge will still review each case, and they'll determine culpability and therefore determine their sentence. The only thing is we're taking out the possibility of execution as a sentence. Now this is just because if you have mental impairments such as schizophrenia or PTSD, or you're missing 20% of your frontal lobe like Cecil Clayton was, you should not be executed because your culpability in the crime is less. And the negative team has actually ignored the real argument. If we go back to the 1AC, the argument was that the only way to protect mentally ill people was to abolish capital punishment, because capital punishment kills mentally ill people. We brought up several names. They've completely ignored the root of the argument, but rather tried to avoid it by talking about the case basis. Now my third justification is that of arbitrary. Now they've also ignored the issue of that being a wide disparity in capital cases, and it's much more massive than other cases. As I've already quoted a professor from Yale, who said that it's not reserved for the worst of the worst offender, but rather comes to factors such as political interest, the quality of the lawyer, and other such random factors. Now, whether or not someone receives death should not be so random. That's because justice is not random. Now, because of that, and this issue itself, the wide disparity we see in capital cases, has been dropped in this entire debate room. So they have not addressed the fact that capital punishment has a wide disparity in its application. And my fourth and final justification is that epitome of government waste. Epitome of government waste. Now my first subpoint under this is that of no deterrence. No deterrence. Now I'd like to clarify this issue because this issue is a lot more simple than the negative made it out to be. They said, well, why should we trust the National Academy of Sciences? That's just one person. We have all these studies. But what happens, this was conducted by the nation's top criminologists. This is a combination of the nation's top criminologists and neuroscientists. They examined 3 decades of research. And for the 3 reasons that I read in my 2AC, they found that they left out these issues. So because the studies themselves are flawed. For example, they do not factor in the effects of non-capital punishment that could be imposed. And the studies that the negative team has cited used incomplete or implausible models of what a potential murderer's perception would be like. So because we see that the negative team's evidence uses implausible models for determining deterrence, because of that it has been discredited. Also like to go back to the 88% study. 88% study. Now this study, I wrote in my 2AC, was dropped. I brought this study from the University of Colorado that said that 88% of the nation's top criminologists believe the death penalty does not have a deterrent effect. And I said that only 5% said it does have a deterrent effect, and 6% said no opinion. I brought this up in my 2AC, and that study was dropped. The affirmative team is in the consensus, and the negative team is not. Now my subpoint B is that of cost extra and is not needed. A cost extra is not needed. We've argued this in our 1AC that is no longer needed to protect society and it costs millions of extra dollars. My subpoint C is that of prison safety upheld. Because of the millions of dollars we're saving by abolishing this policy, those millions of dollars will be spent to prisons and actually increasing the security. So because of that, by abolishing death penalty, we're protecting security. So now I'd like to conclude on the words of Stephen B. Wright. He said that the death penalty is still arbitrary. And in fact, the system is still fallible in deciding both guilt and punishment. In addition, the death penalty is costly and does not accomplish anything. It is beneath a society that has a reverence for life and recognizes that no human being is beyond redemption. So for these reasons, that it strongly opposes our principles of life, physical responsibility, and justice, I strongly urge and affirm the ballot. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time,
You're
sir.
welcome.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for judging us. You really appreciate it.
Great job.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you
your
for
time.
your
I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining, guys.
You're welcome. Hey, great job.
It was a good round.
No, that's been fun so far today. This one's fun.
This is the best debate round so far tonight. I guess that's a compliment.
Unless this is the first
But there's no clue there which way he's leaning.